Alright y'all, today we got a very special video. After all my years of making samples and beats all the way back since like 2017, I have compiled my best 20 tips of advice to get better at just making beats and samples in general. I literally wrote like paragraphs of this shit. So yeah, I'm just gonna run through all of these and just use them in your own samples and get better. So the first one, the most crucial in my opinion, is sound selection. Sound selection is number one crucial for samples because it sets the foundation and the style that you're going for, like the genre. So my best advice to get better sound selection is just to study. Listen to a lot of music, especially the genre that you're going for. After listening to the music for a long time, you'll recognize patterns and you'll recognize certain sounds that they combine, and you just steal it and use it in your own samples and you'll slowly start to learn it. Tip number two, we got keeping it simple. A lot of people either have samples that are way too basic and bare or just way too overcomplicated and have like a million sounds and too much going on. My best advice that has helped me make my samples more simple but still be really catchy and still contain that high quality sound is just making a sample how you usually make it, adding all the sounds you want. Once it's done, I would go in and I would just remove certain sounds that I thought were unnecessary or containing too much space. Tip number three I have is pay attention to dynamics. If you're already at the more advanced level and you're trying to make especially like realistic sounding samples, this is crucial to help you out because it's helped me a ton. But basically what I mean is the volume and the expression of a certain sound or instrument helps create a lot more feeling and emotion in your samples. My best advice to learning this is definitely studying AYN sounds. Any of the guys from that group have really taught me so much about adding more dynamics and paying attention to that element in your samples. Okay, number four, we have avoid over processing. Now this is something that I see a lot of people struggle with, and I struggled with big time back when I was really first starting out. Like I said, I was a Q-Beats fanboy, so I was really trying to go for that vintage Q-Beats sound. And to get that vintage sound, I remember literally my mixer track was looking filled with effects, RC20s, sketch cassette, a bunch of these VSTs that were just degrading the sound. Similar to overcomplicating your samples, I really recommend just going in your sample or your mixer track and just removing certain effects that you feel like doesn't make too big of a difference, that you don't really need. But a lot of times you're going to want to prefer the natural sound of an instrument, especially if you're using like a real instrument like a piano or some strings or vocals. Tip number five. Now this is more for like workflow and increasing your speed, but I have saving and organizing your favorite sounds. Now once you've made samples for a good amount of time, you start to recognize what VSTs, one-shot kits, what vocal kits you start to really like and could depend on to go for some really dope sounds. So it helps a lot to be able to just mark them, save them in a specific folder, however you prefer to do it, to always know where they're at. Tip number six, this is another one that I learned pretty recently, like this year, that's a little more advanced. You don't need this, but in my opinion it helps a lot and helps you stand out with your samples, and that is using automation clips. I feel like I don't see too many people use automation clips, but they can definitely help give a unique sound to your samples and make everything be a lot more smooth. My favorite way of using them is by automating a lot of like effects to make things be a lot more smooth, especially if you love to add switch ups in your samples. Tip number seven, I have develop a unique sound, a unique style. Now this is something that is really tough for me to give advice on because this just comes with time. You're not gonna be the most creative, different sounding producer after your first day, week, month, or even year. This takes a lot of time of experimenting and just finding your sound overall. My best advice to help is to just experiment. That's really it. You want to experiment with a bunch of different sounds, melodies, effects, and experiment as much as you can. You're gonna fail, you're gonna find some some pretty shitty stuff, but then eventually you'll find some cool things to use frequently in your own samples and create your own sound. Tip number 8. Now this is pretty simple, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys already do this, but whether you're a beginner or not, study industry level samples. This is probably my best piece of advice when it comes to just getting better. I remember doing this myself. I know a lot of producers around me, people that I've met, talked to, have all done this, and that's just studying some of the greats. There's so many fire producers out there to learn from. But overall, you'll start to analyze the sound selection they use, the melodies, the patterns, and you'll start to take all this information in and use it in your own samples, and then create your own little style along the way. Tip number 9. Now this one is a little more different, but I wrote down trust your ear. Now this relates to experimenting and creating your own style, putting trust in yourself and putting trust in your ear. At the end of the day, it's your sample. You're making music that you like, that you want to hear. So don't be afraid to go out the box and use something that a lot of other people don't use. I even follow this rule a lot when it comes to sending out packs for artists. When somebody would DM me or like, hey, I need some samples for 21 Savage or Lil Baby or Drake, a lot of times I'll send specific vibes that I know they would like, and then I also make some room for some experimental stuff, some stuff that I just trust myself, where I'm like, okay, this is a little different, but I feel like he would like it, and if it goes well, it goes well. Now building off trusting your ear, tip number 10, I have make music you like. Some people might think this sounds a little silly. It is so important to, at the end of the day, have fun and make music you like. One of the biggest things that you may not notice when it comes to getting burnt out and losing inspiration and motivation to make music is because you're following and making music that other people want. When you really experiment and make music that you want to hear, that you like, your inspiration just skyrockets to another level, and your motivation to just sit down and create music will increase instead of just feeling burnt out all the time. Plus, when you enjoy the process, you will be a lot more consistent in making music, content, anything, and you will be a lot more successful with being more consistent. Tip number 11, again, building off what I just said, is having fun. Again, I know this may sound a little stupid. It may sound a little like, bro, this is the most dumbest tip ever. But it's true though, man. A lot of people struggle with this, especially when you're working a lot of hours, chasing placements, or just trying to build a name for yourself. It kind of starts to feel like a job, and you start to lose the original feeling of why you started making music, which is because it was fun. It was a hobby. You know, you just enjoyed doing it. Have fun and enjoy the process. And like I just said, if you enjoy the process, you will see that you become a lot more consistent and be a lot more successful. Tip number 12, this is probably the most important tip of them all that kind of relates to all 20 in one, and that is practice as much as you can. I remember seeing a video on Desright.
It's like, it's so simple. Put as many hours you can every day in making music and you'll get better at it.
You can't expect yourself to become the best or get way better if you're only putting a couple hours in a week. You need to be putting as much time as possible, and also this would help a lot with training your ear. Tip number 13 is listen to different genres. This is something that a lot of people need to start doing. The amount of times people send me loops, people send me starters, and it's the same stuff over and over. I don't get a lot of experimental stuff, to be honest, but if you want to go in that direction, listen to different genres. It will help you so much listening to even like jazz music, you know what I'm saying? Taking elements that you like from that style here in your own samples and then bringing it to your sample, you know, tweaking it to fit your style will help you learn new techniques, new effect chains, and it will make your samples, your workflow, everything way more versatile. Tip number 14 is practice sound design. Now this is obviously something you don't need, and I wrote this down because even if you understand a little bit of sound design, whether that's on Omnisphere, CRM, or with effects, it will help you a lot to get the specific sound you want for your samples, and it's going to give you a lot more control overall when it comes to designing the sounds you want. So number 15, I have compare your samples to industry quality ones. Now I know I kind of said this earlier. For this one, I'm basically talking about just listening to a sample you've made and then someone else's sample that's very similar or the same style or genre. For an example, when I was trying to get better at soul samples, I would listen to them and compare them to some other famous soul samples or really good successful soul records, and I would listen to mine and listen to theirs, and I instantly noticed some things that I was lacking on, and I instantly noticed some things that they did very well that I eventually took those things and just fixed and applied in my sample and would make mine a lot better. Tip number 16 I have is invest in your craft. Now this applies to anything, whether you're getting VSTs or you're getting real hardware. Investing in your craft is crucial. Not only does it keep it refreshing for yourself, but it helps you learn new techniques, new instruments, and helps you stand out. One of the best pieces of advice I could always give and that I am working on every day is learning instruments. Not a lot of people know guitar, not a lot of people know how to make vocals, not a lot of people can play piano. So building these traits and learning these skills will help you tremendously with standing out as a producer and getting into these rooms that a lot of other people can't get in. You bring value, you bring something new to the table. table that a lot of other producers don't have, and you're not gonna get this until you invest in your music. Tip number 17 is create everything from scratch. Now this is something that I did naturally. Like when I started making samples, I didn't know what loops were, I didn't know what midis were. Almost 90% of my beats that I was making were all from scratch. This gave me a huge advantage against other producers because I didn't need to depend on loops, I didn't need to depend on phrases or starters, and I trained my ear very early on to know that things are in key, to build a good ear for making samples and good music in general. Tip number 18 is using intervals. This is a very simple tip that took my samples to the next level and helped me get better at writing melodies and midis down. Literally just having a simple melody but taking notes and duplicating them up and down octaves is the most simplest thing ever, but will really help your sound. Tip number 19 is more towards workflow, but I wrote down create multiple versions of a sample. Now we've all asked ourselves what's more important, quality or quantity, and to be completely honest with you, you need both. Even if you make the craziest sample of all time, if you're making one every week or even like one every couple days, there's going to be someone else out there making 10 plus loops a day that's going to be outworking you because they have more stuff to send out, and the more you send out, the higher your chances are of getting these records. So a very simple thing that I started doing that I really learned from realism watching a video of his is just creating multiple versions of a sample. Whether you spent an hour, 2 hours on a sample, you could do within 10 minutes, flip that sample into like 5 other ones. Now last but not least, tip number 20, going off of flipping your own samples, is bounce things into an audio form. This is something I do a lot of my melodies, and that's just bouncing out a melody and then just flipping it with the audio. There's a lot of things you could do with the audio format that you can't do by just tweaking the MIDI. You can reverse it, you can mess with the time manipulation, you could even mess with the Stretch Pro feature that FL Studio has, format shifting. There's a million things you could do, and it opens up a whole new variety of creativity. But that's pretty much all the 20 tips I have. Now there's probably like a million things I left out, but these are just the things that I think are the most crucial. But if you have any tips that have helped you out, to leave them in the comment section down below. First, link in the description down below. I have a bunch of my sound kits on sale. I'll help you guys with your drums, your samples, vocals, presets, whatever you guys need. With that being said, if you guys did enjoy and learn something new in this video, make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell so you don't miss any more videos, and I'll see you guys in the next video.